Heaven. Everybody wants to go there, but nobody knows what it is. Until now. Here's a tease for you. Previews of coming attractions. Heaven is inner life out. It is life beyond expressed. Chapter 1. What's this? Most of us have heard about heaven all of our lives. What we generally conjure up is a place, not here, where there is rest and peace, gentle music and choirs praising God, the end of conflicts, and constant feelings of not too well described love. Sounds pretty boring. Who would want to go to heaven if that were it? We know very little about heaven other than what our religions tell us about it. It exists, and we have to take that on faith. But who, as they say, has ever been there and lived to tell about it? Well, quite a few, it seems. Have you heard of, are you one of, or do you know people who have had what's called a near-death experience? I recently received this email about one particular near-death experience. Last night, my mom and I were sitting in the living room talking about life. In between, we talked about the idea of living or dying. I said to her, "Mom, never let me live in a vegetative state, totally dependent upon machines and liquids from a bottle. If you see me in that state, I want you to disconnect all the contraptions that are keeping me alive. I'd much rather die." Then my mom got up from the sofa with this real look of admiration towards me and proceeded to disconnect the TV, the cable, the dish, the DVD, the computer, the cell phone, Twitter, Facebook, my iPod, and the Xbox. Then she went to the refrigerator and threw out all my beer. I almost died. Well, that's not the kind of near-death experience we want to talk about here. We can legitimately be fascinated by the subject of near-death experiences because, if true, they give us real glimpses of the other side, of heaven. They will either supplement or contradict our human resonance with eternal life and our religious teachings that amplify our understanding of eternal life. Let's take a look. The trouble, of course, with the concept of eternal life is that nobody can prove it. Such a notion seems to be scientifically unverifiable. It's not something that with confidence we can list the attributes of it on a yellow pad and then conclude with logical assurance it's proof. We just can't do it. The belief in eternal life is just one of those things that seem to be so human that most of us throughout history have clung to a belief in it. It just wells up from within us that such a reality is true. Moreover, most of our various religions affirm to us that this is so, and leave us then with another argument, one from authority, to bolster our human inclination. But these two considerations are not the only ones available to us. Throughout human history, both recorded and what we know of pre-recorded history, people from every culture and geographic region have had a belief in afterlife. Such beliefs derive from projected needs and wants, from primitive to sophisticated religious thought, from connectedness to others and some inner rejection of death being final and terminal to existence, from the teachings of spiritual masters and from sacred scriptures. The trouble has been that certain lack of definitive proof of an afterlife. Exceptions may have been the shamans of primitive peoples, some of whom claimed to be able to communicate with the other side, and even to be able to cross back and forth between this life and the other side. But they would hardly count as proof for most sophisticated thinkers. No, rather, belief in an afterlife is usually taken as one of those things most of us human beings just know to be true, like all of the other most important things in our lives are. For example, accepted as true, but not able to be logically deduced. Things as such... Start that paragraph over again. The trouble has been that certain lack of definitive proof of an afterlife. Exceptions may have been the shamans of primitive peoples, some of whom claimed to be able to communicate with the other side, and even to be able to cross back and forth between this life and the other. But they would hardly count as proof for most sophisticated thinkers. No, rather belief in an afterlife is usually taken as one of those things most of us human beings just know to be true, like all of the other most important things in our lives are. That is, accepted as true, but not able to be logically deduced. Things such as why we love this person and not that other person, why we like to do certain things and not other things that others like, why we value truth over lies and beauty over chaos. And yet, just as in every other awakening over time and growing out of increased knowledge and perspective, there have been occurrences on a continual basis throughout history which give us more provable insights and perhaps lead to proof one day. We call these near-death experiences. In all probability, near-death experiences are what those ancient shamans and mystics lived through, and then came back to report to their contemporaries. On a purely surface level, many critics of the concept of an afterlife speculate that the deep human desire to endure beyond our physical death is what produces and what produced near-death experience, that they are figments of our deeply rooted hopes. However, from what we are now discovering about near-death experiences with applied scientific research and verifiable data, it's becoming increasingly more likely that, to those with open minds that is, that the ancient reports of near-death experiences are what caused human beings to conceive of and accept the probability of an afterlife. Near-death experiences occur when a person in a death-grip situation, just about to lose life, or more commonly, actually being dead, sometimes even pronounced clinically dead, has an experience of life on the other side of this physical life, and comes back from the dead to reveal what he or she has seen and learned. The time period that these people are actually dead is usually 5 to 15 minutes, but it's not uncommon for some to be dead an hour or longer. During these times, when these experiencers were beyond life here, they remain completely lucid, having experiences beyond what is possible in this life, and can often describe details and events taking place in this plane, around their dead bodies, or elsewhere on Earth. They also describe realities on the other side which are beyond our wildest imagination. Near-death experiences can happen to anyone of any age, any culture, any religion. They happen to people who are considered good or saintly. They happen to people who are considered scoundrels or bad apples. And they happen to people in between. In fact, it seems that there are more instances among people who are at a critical life juncture, or who have paid little notice to their spiritual sides and benefit more when they do have such an experience, than among people who are well balanced and happy. In centuries past, few people talked of such experiences in civilized societies. They would have been thought possessed by the devil or insane, and they would have put themselves outside their own village or social network. If they could, they kept such an experience to themselves. If they let it slip, it was often the end of them, unless they were skilled enough to become the local holy person. Such a social restraint worked well to suppress recognition or evidence of near-death experiences. In primitive societies, such experiences either led to one becoming a shaman or being killed by a stronger competitor shaman. In more recent decades, people who spoke of such things, In more recent decades, people who spoke of such things may not have been killed or institutionalized, but they were considered nutty, fruitcakes, oddballs. This social stigma was usually enough to keep the experiencers quiet. Not until a few decades ago did enough people seemingly not care anymore about societal consequences and just talk openly about what had happened to them in a near-death experience. And that anecdotal evidence of something going on here began to mount. The study of near-death experiences is so new that among many lesser sociological polls about them, there is only one scientifically accepted valid poll as to the rate of incidence. It was conducted by the Gallup organization in 1982, and there has not been a comparatively wide and scientifically valid poll like it since. Gallup concluded that somewhere near 4.5% of the American public had had a near-death experience. This would equate to 12 to 20% of those who are in the process of dying. That percentage, applied to today's American population of 300 million plus, equates to approximately 15 million people, a surprising, perhaps staggering. The study of near-death experiences is so new that among many lesser sociological polls about them, there is only one scientifically accepted valid poll as to the rate of incidence. It was conducted by the Gallup organization in 1982, and there has not been a comparatively wide and scientifically valid poll like it since. Gallup concluded that somewhere near 4.5% of the American public had had a near-death experience. This would equate to 12 to 20% of those who are in the process of dying. That percentage, applied to today's American population of approximately 300 million plus, equates to about 15 million people, a surprising, perhaps staggering number. Anecdotal evidence is that the number of near-death experiencers is increasing as time goes on. We don't know whether that percentage of the population having a near-death experience translates to other developed countries outside the United States of America or not. We don't know whether the percentage holds for undeveloped parts of the world. The poll only considered adults, so we don't know how the percentage would compare for children. Melvin Morse, MD, in his late 1980s book, Closer to the Light, estimated that nearly 70% of children close to death have a near-death experience. Similar societal perceptions abound now as well. Dr. Morse says that a majority of patients who have had children die have a vision of their child within a year of their deaths. Andrew Greeley and the National Opinion Research Council at the University of Chicago found that 42% of the United States populations feels that they have actually been in contact with someone who died. This is a story told by a lady named Jill in Rochester, New York. It's quoted in the book Questions and Answers from Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, printed by Hampton Roads in 1999. This is Jill speaking. I come from a life history that includes decades of self-loathing and debilitating depression, culminating in chronic illness and toxic drama. During one of my major operations, I stopped breathing and was clinically dead for 16 to 20 minutes. I had what was commonly referred to as a near-death experience, which shifted my level of awareness so completely that I no longer am who I was. During my death journey, I watched the medical team work to resuscitate me, and as time progressed without success, I listened to them begin to construct an explanation for why they had lost me to offer my family. Highlights of my afterlife experience included a new understanding of how time works and how expansive our ability to know is. I saw that knowledge is limitless. At one point, I was able to comprehend how this universe works, and most incredible of all, I experienced what can only be described as unconditional love, which is simply love without need. I also encountered a being of light, God, quite an occasion for a non-believer, who knew me intimately and loved me so completely I cannot describe the feeling here. This divine being knew I didn't believe in his existence, knew I would argue about having to return to the body, and loved me nonetheless. The other profound revelation during this experience was that this divine source had a wonderful sense of humor, and that he delighted in mine. This is a very condensed account of my death experience, and does not touch on the effects it had on my life's journey since. Like so many people, painful losses and my own human fears have marked my life journey. I am still healing from the death of my marriage, and I am still struggling financially. I don't know where I'm headed, but I know that I have a sacred contract to fulfill. My heart is open, and the spirit is ready. What I do know is that I am committed to remembering all that I am by how I present myself every day. Lastly, I know from my teachings during my death experience that nothing is coincidental.